Evet, tekrar hoş geldiniz.
Welcome back. Today's fifth session will be held now, which will be presented by Meriç Eryürek. He will be mentioning about the creation of complete templates and methods for drawing roadmaps. I'd like to invite him now.
Hoş geldiniz.
Welcome.
Nasılsınız?
How are you, Meriç?
Olur.
I'm alright. Let me start quickly. Now you can share your screen with the audience.
Peki.
No, then I think that there's no problem, and I'm starting the presentation. Yes, we see the screen. Your voice is quite good. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. Of course, there are experts and masters and celebrities here, and listening to my presentation will take their rhythm down, I guess, but I will be talking about the next generation storytelling, or especially focusing on harmonies in storytelling. What is our state in this in the industry, and what are the pitfalls we face? I'd like to mention about them. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Meriç Eryürek, and what I do is I am a lecturer, a brand manager, and a gamer. But it was in the past, and now I play games and I talk business. You may know Gaming Istanbul because I am one of the two people who founded that, and I have a Vardiya agency. I am one of the partners of this, and also you may also know about the Kalkgel, whenever I'm invited. I also lecture at the universities. At Bahçeşehir University last year, I lectured them, and I have two books as well. I'm also an author, and I spend too much time on playing games. Therefore, nowadays I do not have much time. And these are the brands I work with. I have worked with until now, and depending on my experiences and lectures I gave at the universities and deducing something from there, I want to mention about our status in storytelling and how much we know storytelling, what was our position in the gaming sector. My presentation will be focusing on this. And nowadays, we are talking about the cold truth. This presentation will not be about deep technology or deep expertise. This is a 101 presentation because now is at the entrance level of workshop titled storytelling, and even such a basic entry takes up 42 hours at least. But explaining storytelling within only an hour is very difficult. Therefore, my presentation will be philosophic and rhetoric, and therefore, there will be a 101 conversation, and it will be on storytelling. And as a producer and as a storyteller for the brands and lecturing on them, first of all, what I can say is that everyone is doing a serious mistake. Actually, there is a geographical locational problem, which is a deficiency. And what is that deficiency? Narration engineering or storytelling engineering is a branch of our work. It is an indispensable part, but we do not consider it as it is. Actually, there are 8,000 students There are student groups consisting of 8,000 students or over, and I have been lecturing to them. I also serve for the gaming companies. Sometimes I provide consultancy on the basis of products, or I deal with the TR works, and I had the opportunity to observe many parts of the industry, and we are trying to support the indie group as much as possible, and there are also storytellers among them, and I was one of the advisors to the group, and I have a serious portfolio about the errors or mistakes, let me say, the first mistake of us is the structural change. In the communication world, there has been a structural change which is reflected in our social life, and which took place during the 80s. But storytelling also had underwent a change in structure, but we understood it later due to our cultural or socio-cultural structure. Actually, we imported that change, but it seemed like a safe on ourselves. It was not within our culture, and it was up to 80s, or let me say 90s. And in the past, we used to release narrative works, TV series, cinema, computer games, movies, even novels. Actually, our basic belief was that we were structuring a story, and now we used to continue with developing it, and with a marketing program we get the results, the achievement, and it was the structure of the 80s up to 90s, and it was an old mindset, and actually at the basic, we see it in the workflows in many industries, and we are not at the level of universal story engineering, because story is considered as an onset, as a starting point, but thinking it as a linear thing was our problem. Nowadays, I have colleagues I work with, and there are many indies in our group, and there are many students that I lecture to, and they generally think the story is a linear thing. One of my young friends said about a game they were developing. Um, they sent some links and artworks about their games, and I really liked it very much. And as a gamer, and I saw the potential very well, and the concept was also very well. It has not been released yet, so I cannot go into detail, but the characters was really good. They were good at 3D. The concept was nice, and there was an average Bioshock or similar games, and they really worked hard on it. It was clear, and but the cold truth, which actually surprised me, that how to develop the story, my young friend asked. And of course there were some alarms generated by the professional companies. When we say story development, there is an alarm. Actually, there is a great work here, and which is worked on diligently. There is a game, but how to progress the story is the question. But this is a huge mistake to ask that question at that point. Actually, it is really contradictory to this linear workflow. It is a bad start, and at some point, I want to repeat it once again. It is a waste of efforts, because in the past we saw them great artworks were weak in storytelling, therefore they couldn't be popular. And there were some local games like this. And in the market, actually, those games couldn't find a place. And some some games with a good storytelling were much better than those, and actually and mentioned by the key persons in the Balkans. Actually, first, we have not adopted this linear model in the first place. There is a universal story, and we have not started to turn it into a market story. But before this, in the universe, now they started to change the structure. Now they're saying that the story is not independent of the narration of the brand. First, we conceptualize the story. It may be a company's, a game developer's story, but it is the core. And then in branding, in communication with the gamer, and in all the platforms, in transmedia or multimedia stories, the products coming out of that story will be on our way. Actually, let me give some examples from the real life. Actually, what kind of a storytelling will there be in a puzzle game? And some students also ask this question. But there are hundreds of thousands of puzzle games. But why Mario was different? Because there is a down-selling stress story at the underlying that Mario game, and there is a good game design. And when you tell it through transmedia and when you share it, then that epic story provides a snowflake and a network effect for you. Think in this way. You may know Subway Surface, which is different from the others, but what was the factor making it different? Was it the mechanics? And if you plan to do de facto games, then you have to be different. You have to be good at mechanics. And now we are no longer living in the 80s. We do not say that the graphics are great or the characters are perfect, but the games are evaluated as a whole. Therefore, there is and there is a game, for example, whose production lasted for 3 days, excuse me, 3 years. But there is another game which was developed, created and developed within much shorter time, but they get the same attention from the audience. And in Subway, for example, server, there are, for example, 10,000 of games. And what are the differentiating features of the games? There is an epic based story for all them. For the new beginners, I ask the same question. Who writes your story? Before saying which platform, I ask what is your story? Because your brands, your game, your design, your time, if you are an hyper casual, all will be based on this. Especially if you worked on hyper casual and continued with mass production, then on the basic uh, on the basic story you will be producing many games in the future. Therefore, at that point, when you ask how to proceed with the story, then you are not on the right way, in my opinion. A designer, a developer, and an investor comes together, and it is the golden triangle in my phrases, but the story must be there from the very beginning, because in the end we shouldn't forget that all the project is based on that robust base. Therefore, now it is not only the core of your game, but it will also be reflected in your brand, in your company policies, and etc. And this is the structure now. Now the story is in the core, and it affects the marketing, social media use, digital media use, brands, and the story must be in your core. And Mertcan, in the previous session, also delivered a presentation. I really appreciate him. I know him from a game jam. There were really good games, but I remember him for doing something different. And I will not, of course, make it public, but he had a different perspective to the gameplay from the UI perspective, and he was really thinking unlike the others, and he was struggling hard to take this story to a next tier. And he is now he is now the founder of one of the most successful studios, and this is not coincidence, because he's different. His way of thinking is different. Whenever I mention about Mertcan, he is really well known, and now his story is uh, well known as well, like him. And actually, this was a great success story for me. Brands, games are all around this core. Now, it's not possible to market your game except for the narration. And who does it in multi-platform writing, transmedia writing, and on the platform sharing different parts of the story and getting the success? Who are doing all this? There are one or two indies among them, but these are the basic names, and their success is not open to discuss. Actually, all are really successful, and all are successful franchises. But I want to give good two examples. Actually, in universal storytelling is not yet understood by us, but we are trying to transit to the transmedia. One of the games is Defiance. It was launched in 2003. I guess a TV series story was combined with a game, and it was an interactive game, because the gamer, the user, was to decide at some point, and it was quite a successful program. If you haven't watched Defiance yet, I really recommend it for its archive value. It will open your horizon. And secondly, now there is a campaign, Raid Shadow Legends. Actually, if you use Instagram, you are frequently seeing it. What have they done in their ad campaigns? The story actually of the game is provided, and they put the story in their ad. And now, from a different perspective, these guys looked at the issue. The characters come into your real world, and look at the ads of this. Actually, the characters are a weak semi-gods, and there are two arcs, and two gods are discussing because they have arcs or other dungeons, for example, and the real life conditions are uh, harmonized with the characters actually, and it really attracted my attention, and in the end I really downloaded it and played it. Actually, the concept of the story will proceed in the future, and it's also the basis of their marketing campaign. And in storytelling, there are three important things: relevance, sustainability, and reliance. And now, the story ensures the sustainability of the game, and on the other hand, for their advertisement campaign, with low production, with low budget, they do a really robust advertisement campaign with their own assets. And why is this so? Because at the basis, they place their story in the core. Actually, this is not different from what I'm saying. Now, what do not we do? We are trying not to learn universal storytelling. We resist it, actually. But why? Now, please open your Netflix and look at the Turkish TV series. Actually, move away from the games. You will, in the end, see some TV series in Twitter or some others. Some people like the TV series and some do not. But uh, none of the Turkish TV series in Netflix are universal storytellers, but you just draw a triangle. Actually, the conflict rises, and at the apex there will be a climax, and the hero of the story will see its name, will see its life, its roadmap, and everything we gather, every factor we gather seems like a story. And while producing games as well, many share the same idea. Some young groups say that we have written a story, so let's start, they say. However, whether these stories are also popular or may also be popular in England or in the UK, and can we transit it to the global platform, or we are we do not know the work. We are just at the beginning, but in the game developing groups, the basic problem is to put the story aside. Actually, it is taken as an asset, as an element of the game. However, story is actually in the core of all the business models, all the production models, and it's the core, it's the center. Now look at the issue. It's not an indie now, but it was an indie. Look at Witcher. In my opinion, is a non-linear storytelling, and on the other hand, no one but no one will think that it will be a game to be played by Mark Hammer while they were staying on aluminum chairs at that stand at the exhibition. And at the basic of their story, there was an antagonist, and now there was this story already written, and actually. They did some universal storytelling basing on the stories which had not been told in a universal storytelling, and their success was great, and we do not do it. Now, this a very good story a very good story is not enough. And The Protector, for example, the series in Netflix, The Protector, is good in terms of story, but it's important to ensure its sustainability because it will be your material at the basic of your whole workflow. And I'm sorry to say that I wrote two novels, but including myself, I say that mm, yet we do not know the rules and principles of universal storytelling, and we don't even search for it in Google because we generally think that we already know it, but it shall be overcome, especially for the young who are just new in the sector, and because this is the failing point, in my opinion. Because at some point in production, they ask themselves, "What will we do now?" And it's a huge complexity. Now, when there is nothing to continue with, then the story is stuck there. As I have already said, this is quite a long workshop. I lectured it in 2 semesters. It was not enough, but if this is a business and if it's about a game development, then you need to have a story. And while developing that story, producing that story, you need to look at your core values because first you need to believe in your values to to base upon them, and you cannot sell that game to anyone because no one is that professional. And then we shouldn't forget that at the basic of all our idea that there is a conflict, and if there is no conflict, a value is not formed. It actually takes hours to go into detail for this, but while developing a game, then again you have a hero and there are snobs and other characters, other story elements that your hero will conflict, and they will give your core story. And what is the core story? Now, we already see that there is a core story, but in the end it will provide you some gains. Now, there is something I say epic pump, and every child starts to walk after imitating the others. Therefore, using cliche is not a mistake, and it's up to you to use it. But the basic, the simplest story also has an epic element because these make us share the values and transmit the values. Stephen King says something. Harry Potter is a guy who finds who is about to find life and the meaning of life, and it's about finding a lover. And of course, the success depends on what you tell, and if it is the profit you're searching for, you need to look for an epic element. You may avoid cliches, you may use them very well, but in the end, your message must be very good because just telling about an orphan who is escaping from the police will not be enough. You must enrich it with the other elements. And whether to design a 3D of an orphan or a very cheerful skates. It is up to you to decide.
Olmadığını söylerler. Ama mesela PUBG benim için groundbreaking bir storytelling örneği. Neden? Çünkü
PUBG is a groundbreaking storytelling example for me because it tries to absorb you into the story, and people try to tell their own stories. Everyone tells from their own angle, but the consumer gets the story of the game. This is the success of PUBG. I think all of you have seen this design, Joseph Camp. This is the hero's journey design. When the hero starts the journey, he sits in his chair, but he feels like he isn't supposed to be there. So, such as Frodo is sitting in his home, and Gandalf comes and says he needs to go to Mordor. So, the hero travels from the world of known to the world of unknown, and meanwhile he does many epic things, heroic things, and after all that, he goes back to his hero. Now he has changed. The world he knows and he doesn't know has have changed. So this is a very old version of character development, and in marketing we use the same thing as the journey of the consumer. So writing the story of your brand, if you have the same business model, the same flow model, you need to overlap them. And in the first slide, I showed you how branding and story follows each other. That's the smartest thing. So what you do is the hero of your game becomes the hero of your business, and you start communicating with your customers via that hero. And some people write sad stories about this. Some stories are very successful, and without a big budget or a big time, you create a story for your marketing. It's not an indie game, but it's not a big studio. The Secret World, you can check this out. I think The Secret World in the history of games is the second best transplayer multi-platform story writing example. Maybe you can spare some time to check that out, because some people created a puzzle games of 1,000 pieces, and someone added RPG elements to that game. So we can have the brand value or the exit strategy or the ideas about our future lifestyle. We have a prototype about this. I think The Secret World will open up your mind. And in this journey, as your hero goes through this journey, people often ask me how to write a story. This is a cold truth. No one will tell you how to write a story. They can tell you the methodology of it. And it's different when it is told by someone who does it, and when it is told by someone who looks at it from a distance. For example, in Joseph Campbell's business flow, they tell you about the whale and its stomach. Someone can tell you about this, but as long as you don't experience it personally, it won't be reflected in your game. And the theme. People often ask, how should their game move forward? Some ask whether they can include puzzles on the road. Well, you can use puzzles. In Strange Blue Cat, maybe you can use a puzzle like that, or the whole game can be based on puzzles. So I don't know what you're going to do, so I cannot give a specific answer, but what I see is that long after they start writing games, they choose a theme, and they make one mistake. Choosing a theme should be done in the very beginning. Because if I come to you and say, let's make a game, and we work on it 3 months, and then we choose platform, you would think I'm a crazy person. So when you don't choose the theme in the beginning, you don't know where the story will lead you to. So believe it or not, this written culture of 12,000 years has given us nothing but 6 main themes. Everything boils down to these 6 main themes. It's a hero versus Goliath, or a hero helping someone out of a hard situation, or a hero is trying to complete an impossible mission by traveling around the world, or the hero sets on a journey and goes back to home, or the hero comes to the verge of death but bounces back, or we write stories based on commedia. So these are the main 6 stories that we listen. But you may say that Tarantino does this, or you can use flashbacks. No, basically we have the same themes. The styles that we build on these themes can change, but before you start building your game, you need to know that the hero is someone who is in a place he's not supposed to be at the wrong time, and you can experiment this. But first of all, you need to do many exercises before you start experimenting. So you need to first have some epic elements and make people buy that game, then you can do something experimental. And I'm sure that you will get what you want. But particularly for young teens, that would not be the right thing to do. You should try to stay in the safe comfort zones on the technology, on the story side. How can you do this? That would take a very long session, so I will try to summarize. First of all, in a novel, you cannot distinguish the character from the author. It's the same in the game. So you need to define your core values. I mean, you need to define the values that you adopt, because your message and your story should follow these values, because you cannot write a story if you don't believe in it. No one is that professional. Because I was talking to a writer and I asked, how the fuck did you like this? And he gave me the answer that was given by Stephen King, with a hunch, he said, because you saw in his eyes that they really believed in the story. And they were trying their best to show us what the hero was going through. So in terms of business and storytelling, your message and your story should be based on those values. And at the end of the day, your business development model will be also based on these values. So your storytelling that has a history of 12,000 years is based on conveying your values to someone else, because there is no other way to convey these values to others. And in my opinion, the arts and technologies, you're doing something which is at the top of all arts and technologies that are created by humankind. So from the very beginning, you should design your values before going into this. I don't think that would be right. And I don't think these projects will work out. And if you think you will only write a story for your game, so the game should be successful, the story should be flowing, that's something you should do anyway. But the player will create a synergy between the game and your brand on the basis of some core values. I hope we can have some time to open this up in the future in another session because it would take a long time to talk about this. And maximize interactive multi-platform assets. Don't think this is something technical, such as you go on Twitter and see 80 messages and think they are the assets. That's not what I'm talking about. The people who are going to play your game will meet with you on some platforms, and you should increase and maximize the interaction on these platforms. Every line you write in the story of that game, every moment that you turn this into design, you're working for your brand. And in today's digital platform, you should take leverage in doing that. And another issue about games. The risk and reward balance is the product. Sometimes it's too difficult, or sometimes the gameplay is too simple. I always tell this to my students. Our product is the risk and reward balance. That's where the game comes out. That's the main reason why we're playing this game. So your story should support that. And replay retention value. This is where we get replay and retention value. Now, people may not want to play these games anymore, but we see the sales figures for different games. So, risk and reward balance, if you set this balance correctly in the light of your core values, replay and retention value will be higher. No platform, no genre is exempt from this. And at the courses and interviews, people often ask me what I did differently. And having the right partners, having the right investment is already what we did. But in 47 years, 50 years, what did you bring to the Turkish game industry? They ask me. And I say, we never targeted gamers, because in our games, when we look at them as digital entertainment, you tend to move away from the set of values. You try to look at the games with the eyes of the common people, because we are elitists, but we want everyone to play our game. So because everyone will be working on this. So targeting, instead of gamers, you should look at how you can involve non-gamers in your game. I think we are working in a very good time. In my youth, it was not possible because gamers were a specific group of people who owned some hardware and equipment. But now you see that people, when they wait for a bus, they can play a game on their mobile phones. So you are quite lucky. The gamer, some of them can be light core and others can be hardcore, but still the concept of gamer covers the bigger population. So as indies, you should target the people who are not gamers, because you don't have a secure structure now. You have to play for the mass. And to do that, you need to ensure accessibility, simplicity, and drawing players with fundamental values. And now, I think I need to wrap up in 3 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we should have a longer session to talk about this. But I just try to summarize my ideas as a person who is focused on building, selling games, and in by industries of gaming for 9 years. I try to summarize the mistakes that I've seen. And we talk the talk, but we know the stories of the companies in top 10 as they turn the stories in their games into the stories of their brands. And as they communicate this in their advertisements and in forums, they make some incredible mistakes. This is an idealized methodology, as you know, but what I see is that people use the idealized method, they impose this method on their team, and they become successful in a shorter time, regardless of their genre or their platform. So this is my recommendation. People who choose that path can go faster. So when they create a story and when they spread that story in the organic structure of their brand, if they have completed the design side, the technical side, they can create a more efficient business model. So don't make this mistake. You should do this in the beginning. So this is my tip. And that's all I have to say. If the Indieway team continues to invite me in their events, maybe we can have three, 4, or 5 sessions to create, to hold a workshop covering the whole process in which we create a game on paper and market it and sell it. But we can do this after the pandemic is over. Maybe we can do this one day.
Q&A kısmında sorularımız var Meriç Bey.
We have some questions actually in the Q&A box.
Tabii ki de.
Maybe you can read them out for me. Yunus Emre Güney asks, as a story writer, I have a concern about our game and I need your idea. I created a very good universe and I want to build some games on it. But the mechanics of these games sometimes don't match with the story. So should we adjust the story to the mechanics or redesign the mechanics according to the story? What do you think? Well, of course, there may be other people who would give a better answer to me to this. But philosophically, in an ideal world, I would say story comes first and mechanics follow, because after writing a whole screenplay and you go to the set and you cannot say that the story should be set in 2100, not in 2050. So if the design and the mechanics can be implemented financially, you should take that into consideration. There's a challenge for every developer. How much your skills will allow you to do that? Because I'm assuming this comes from a smaller studio. Because for a bigger studio, there would be other challenges, such as the timeline problems for the pipeline. So I guess you need to take the story, and before starting the development process, you build the main mechanics, then you go into development. But hyper casuals may hate me for saying this because they are developing games very quickly. Maybe they don't have the time to do that. Any other questions?
Evet, buradayım.
Can you hear me?
Hikaye mekanizmi önceliğe
Yes.
sahip göze alınma sırası olarak diye
Which one comes first, story or mechanics? I think story comes first. Can Ata Hacıoğlu asks, what is your recommendation for improving ourselves to work as a coder at studios like Ubisoft, CD Projekt Red? And do you think we should publish our first game by working with a publisher? Well, I think the first question should be answered by a coder. I'm not the one to answer that question, but I can suggest one thing to my younger colleagues who are just starting to work in this industry. In the global market, when you look at the profiles of employees, you see they have multiple areas of specialization. And these studios may look like a factory to you, but they may have different personal assets. They expect you to perform 100%, and they need you to have an experience and an understanding in various areas. And if you had the training, and if a professional coder tells you to do that, you need to start at a smaller place and try to learn everything like you're a camera that is on record for 24 hours. Because when there is a game is developed, there are 4,000 or 5,000 people involved in the development process. And should we work with a publisher for our first game? Well, without knowing about the content of the game, it's difficult to say this, but assuming that it's an indie game, in that case, you have to work with a publisher. But on the other side, if it's a game that you developed for a platform, if you're thinking about a big client, you can think, I can recommend a different marketing technique, but I need more information. And the next question, Başar Demirbek, which books would you recommend for storytelling in games? This is the last question, actually. We can wrap up. I may answer this with one book. Actually, there is not a single book, but for all storytellers, I can recommend Robert McCullough's Story. It's also in Turkish. I think you should start with that. Because after learning the universal technique of storytelling, we have to learn the different media, different methods. A good novelist can be a bad screenplay writer. So, Story, that book is a good resource. And of course, when you read that book, you need to read about 500 stories, good stories. And also recommend the Comic Toolbox. It was written by a stand-up writer. And it tells about the catchphrase techniques that are used in the platforms that are popular in the transition from analog to digital. And you can also download PDF copies of Hollywood screenplays, and they can give you better ideas than books. So that's the last question, I guess. Yes. I hope to see you in the next session. Thank you very much for bearing with me. Have a nice day.
Tekrar katıldığınız için.
Thank you very much for joining us again.
bilgileriniz
Thank you.
için çok teşekkür ederiz.
Thank you for the presentation. Have a nice day.